The divorce papers were signed in a room that smelled faintly of old wood and cheap coffee. The kind of room where lives were dismantled quietly, without witnesses, without mercy, and without anyone stopping to ask how a woman was supposed to walk out whole after everything she had built was reduced to signatures and stamped pages. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 100 times, telling herself she would stay calm, that she would not cry, that she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. But the body doesn't always listen to pride, and the heart doesn't respect plans made in survival mode. Her ex-husband sat across from her, relaxed, confident, already free. He barely looked at her while the lawyer spoke, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if he were waiting for a delayed flight rather than ending a marriage that had once been his entire world. When he did glance up, his eyes were cold, not angry, not sad, just finished. "You'll receive what's outlined here," the lawyer said neutrally, sliding the final documents forward. "We've already agreed on the terms." Agreed. The word echoed in her head like a lie. She had agreed because she was exhausted, because she had been worn down by months of gaslighting, threats, subtle humiliations, and reminders that she had no one and nothing without him. Because fighting required strength she no longer had. When she stood up, the room tilted. At first, she thought it was nerves. Then heat rushed through her chest, sharp and sudden, stealing the air from her lungs. Her vision blurred. The voices around her stretched into distant echoes, and she barely registered her ex-husband rising from his chair, irritation flashing across his face. "Not now," he muttered. "Can we finish this first?" That was the last thing she heard before the floor rushed up to meet her. She collapsed right there, on divorce day, her body finally doing what her soul had been holding back for months. The ambulance lights cut through the gray afternoon like something unreal, sirens screaming as if announcing the end of something far bigger than a legal union. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly, voices clipped and professional, asking questions she struggled to answer. Stress, dehydration, severe emotional shock, and something else. When she finally opened her eyes, pale ceiling lights above her, she expected silence. Or maybe her ex-husband standing there out of obligation, already detached, already preparing to leave. Instead, she heard a voice she hadn't heard in years. Low, steady, controlled, but shaking underneath. "That's my wife," the nurse paused. "Excuse me?" The man standing at the foot of her hospital bed repeated it, louder this time, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on her face as if afraid she might disappear again if he looked away. "My wife, I'll handle everything." Her ex-husband, who had followed the ambulance out of pure legal necessity, froze in the doorway. Because the man who had just spoken wasn't just anyone. He was a name people recognized, a face that appeared in business magazines, a man worth millions, powerful, untouchable, and unmistakably out of place in a public hospital corridor. And yet, there he was, claiming her. Her ex-husband's confidence cracked for the first time that day. "Wife," he scoffed weakly, "that's not funny." The man turned slowly, his expression calm but lethal. "Oh, it's not a joke," he said. "You just didn't know who you were divorcing." And as she drifted back into unconsciousness, one truth settled deep into her bones. The man who broke her believed he had erased her, but the man standing beside her knew exactly who she was, and always had. When she woke again, the room was quieter. The chaos had retreated. leaving behind the sterile stillness of white walls and the faint rhythmic sound of a heart monitor, reminding her that she was still here, still breathing, even though everything she had believed in had just ended. He was sitting beside her bed, not hovering, not pacing, just there, solid, composed, as if he had claimed that space long before anyone else arrived. His suit jacket was draped over the back of the chair, sleeves rolled up, the subtle sign of a man who had stopped caring how he appeared to the world the moment something real demanded his attention. She didn't need to ask who he was. She knew, because there are some people the heart never files away properly. It simply hides them, carefully, beneath layers of time and compromise, hoping never to be forced to explain their absence. They had met years before her marriage, back when her life was quieter, and her dreams still felt fragile enough to be crushed by the wrong decision. He hadn't been a millionaire then, at least not publicly. He was focused, driven, already building something large and unforgiving, the kind of future that required sacrifice and long absences. And she had been standing at the edge of her own becoming, terrified of disappearing into someone else's ambition. They loved each other in the way two people love when they recognize depth but are too young or too scared to believe it will survive reality. When he was offered the opportunity that would change everything, a chance to expand overseas, to take risks that could either elevate him beyond imagination or destroy him completely, she was the one who let go. Not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him enough not to anchor him to a life he would eventually resent. She never told anyone about him, not her husband, not her friends. Some loves are too significant to be used as explanations later. Life moved on. She married a man who felt safe, predictable, socially acceptable. A man who admired her at first, until admiration turned into expectation, and expectation turned into control. What she never knew was that he followed her life quietly from a distance, not obsessively, not intrusively. He knew when she married. He knew when she stopped smiling in photos. He knew when she disappeared into a marriage that slowly erased her voice. And when he returned to the country years later, powerful now established, wealthy beyond what she could have imagined, he made one decision very clearly. If she ever needed him, he would be there, no matter what. The nurse entered the room softly, checking her vitals, then paused, glancing between them. "Is your husband coming back?" she asked gently. He answered before she could. "I'm here," he said. "That's all that matters." Outside the room, her ex-husband sat stiffly in a plastic chair, his world tilting. He had assumed her collapse was just another inconvenience, another dramatic moment he could dismiss. He hadn't prepared for this. He hadn't prepared for the realization that the woman he thought he had broken had a past and a future far larger than the one he tried to confine her to. And as he watched the door close between him and her hospital room, something unfamiliar settled into his chest. Fear, because for the first time since signing those papers, he understood something far worse than losing her. He had never truly known her at all. The next hours moved like a slow storm. She watched him from her hospital bed, her ex-husband, the man who once promised forever, now fumbling as if the world had suddenly turned upside down just for him. He tried to speak, tried to explain, to charm, to apologize, but the words stumbled out in fragmented, desperate syllables. Every sentence sounded hollow, rehearsed, and painfully inadequate. Her own hands rested on the white blanket, calm and steady. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to accuse or cry. She didn't need to remind him of the nights he spent erasing her, the humiliation of the divorce papers, the crushing weight of betrayal. She had learned that words, when spoken in desperation, only feed the ego of someone who doesn't deserve your pain. Her mind traveled back to the moments that had built this quiet power inside her. The nights she cried silently, the days she forced herself to smile, the months she spent building a life that belonged to no one but her. Every struggle had been a brick, every tear mortar. And now when she looked at him, she realized that all those bricks had formed walls he could no longer breach. Then he noticed the man standing beside her, the one she had called quietly in the ambulance, the one who had held her hand, who had whispered calm assurances, who had claimed her presence as if no one else could, the millionaire who now understood her worth far better than anyone had. He stepped closer, calm, measured, a silent force of authority and protection. His presence alone shifted the room. The ex-husband's confidence faltered. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words failed him. "My wife," the man said again, this time in a low, unwavering tone. "She's mine. And you? You will never touch her life again." The irony was deliciously quiet. The man who thought he had taken everything from her, her love, her security, her dignity, now realized that she had gained a life, a partner, a respect he could never match. He had prepared for the predictable woman he thought she was. What he hadn't counted on was that she had grown into someone untouchable, someone whose value could not be diminished by his betrayal. Her ex-husband's face paled. The lines of arrogance that once gave him pride were replaced by fear, by the first taste of regret he had ever felt in the presence of someone he tried to dominate. I, I thought, he stammered. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Every glance, every quiet smile she gave her new husband said more than words ever could. The room itself seemed to shift with her power, the energy of someone who had endured, survived, and transformed pain into strength. And then she realized something profound. She didn't need him to grovel. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need anyone to witness his humiliation, because her victory was internal. She had survived. She had rebuilt. She had become unshakable. As she rested back against the crisp white pillow, the ex-husband realized what he had truly lost. Not her presence, but the life and strength he could never give her. And in that silent hospital room, she understood that the collapse on divorce day had not been an end. It had been the beginning of everything she was always meant to become. The days after the hospital were strangely quiet. She walked through them almost as if moving through someone else's world. The papers were filed, the legal battles ended, but the emotional weight lingered, subtle and persistent. Yet she carried herself differently now, not like the woman who had collapsed on divorce day, but like someone reborn. Her ex-husband tried to contact her, cautiously at first, then more desperately. Calls, messages, even mutual acquaintances approached her with excuses and apologies. Every attempt landed softly against the armor she had built, failing to breach the calm, quiet authority she now carried. And then there was him, the man who had spoken the words that changed everything, the millionaire who didn't need to show off, who didn't need to justify his love, who simply understood her value without question. With him, she wasn't proving anything. She wasn't performing. She was simply herself, confident, free, and untouchable. She remembered the moment in the hospital when he had called her my wife. It wasn't just the title that mattered. It was the recognition of everything she had endured, everything she had survived, and everything she had become. He had seen her strength before the world ever could, and in that quiet acknowledgement, she finally felt whole again. Her ex-husband's shadow lingered for a while, but it was no longer intimidating, only a reminder of how blind arrogance and selfishness can be when faced with someone who refuses to be diminished. He had assumed weakness. He had assumed compliance. He had assumed she would crumble. Instead, she had grown. Instead, she had chosen herself. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't loud or visible. It was the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, the calm in her mind, the knowledge that she was no longer defined by anyone else's actions. She had survived betrayal, humiliation, and despair. And now she thrived in the quiet, unshakable certainty of her own worth. When the past tried to claw back into her life, she simply smiled. The collapse on divorce day, the hospital chaos, the ex-husband's futile attempts, all of it had led her here, to a life where she wasn't defined by loss, but by survival. A life where love, respect, and dignity were hers because she had chosen them. And that, she realized, was the ultimate truth. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't in watching someone suffer, but in surviving them, rising beyond them, in claiming a peace they can never touch. Thank you so much for watching and supporting StoryHeart.